That summer began like any other in the small town of Pines Village. School vacation was in full swing, and the sun never seemed to tire of shining down on the quiet streets and lush green fields. Sam, Lucas, Alice, and Nina, an inseparable group of friends since childhood, were looking for something to fill their time. They had exhausted all the usual adventures: bike races, afternoons by the pool, and long walks to the creek. They needed something new, something exciting. It was during one of these walks that they found it. Hidden among the tall trees of the woods that bordered the town, an old treehouse stood, barely visible among the thick branches. Time had been cruel to the structure. The boards were weathered and covered in moss, and one of the windows was broken. Yet there was something fascinating about it, like a secret waiting to be discovered. "Wow, this must have been here for decades," Lucas exclaimed, climbing a little higher up the hill to get a better look. "Imagine the stories this house could tell." "Let's restore it," Alice suggested, her eyes shining with excitement. "We could turn it into our secret hideaway. We'll spend the rest of the summer here." The idea was met with enthusiasm. Restoring the treehouse would be the perfect summer project, and the group was already imagining how the place would become their refuge, away from the eyes of the adults. However, as everyone climbed up to explore the house more closely, Nina hesitated. Something about the house bothered her, feeling that this old, lonely structure had seen things that should be forgotten. But not wanting to spoil her friend's excitement, she swallowed her fear and pressed on. Inside the treehouse, the smell of damp wood and dry leaves filled the air. There were cobwebs in the corners, and the wooden floor creaked underfoot. Yet amid the neglect were remnants of a past life. A rusty old trunk in the corner, a worn rocking chair, and a yellowed newspaper clipping pinned to the wall. Lucas, ever the curious one, walked over to the clipping and tried to peel the paper away without damaging it. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the barely legible headline, "Mysterious Disappearance of Child Rocks Pines Village." Alice leaned closer, frowning. "This is from a long time ago. I think I've heard this story before. It was about a boy who disappeared without a trace. My parents talked about it once, but they never gave much detail." Nina felt a shiver run down her spine. "Maybe we shouldn't mess with this. Probably just an old story." "Don't be silly," Sam, ever the skeptical one, said. "This is ancient history, but that doesn't mean it's dangerous. Let's renovate this house and make it our own. Maybe we can even investigate more about it in the meantime." Despite Sam's reassuring words, a seed of doubt had been planted. The treehouse wasn't just a summer project. It held secret. And some secrets, as everyone would come to discover, prefer to stay buried. The next few days were filled with hard work and laughter as the group set about restoring the treehouse. Early in the morning, they would carry boards, hammers, and nails into the woods, where they spent hours cleaning, repairing, and painting. As time went on, the house began to take on a new life. Rotten boards were replaced, windows repaired, and the structure became more solid, welcoming the sunlight that streamed through the treetop. But it wasn't just the physical improvements that kept the group motivated. The story of the mysterious disappearance found in the newspaper clipping remained fresh in their minds, especially Lucas's. Always enjoyed a good mystery. During his breaks from work, he would delve deeper into the case. One afternoon, while the other friends were relaxing in the shade of the trees, Lucas showed up with an old leather briefcase he'd found in the town library. "Guys, I found something interesting," he announced, leafing through the dusty papers. "This case of the missing boy, it happened in 1962. His name was Thomas, and he disappeared while playing alone in the woods." "That's creepy," Alice commented, biting her lower lip. "You think he disappeared near here?" "I don't know for sure," Lucas replied, "but the treehouse was here at the time. It was used by a group of boys who got together to play. Thomas was one of them." Nina, who had been keeping a distance from the conversation until then, finally spoke up. "Don't you think it's strange? The treehouse, the disappearance, and now here we are, as if we were messing with something we shouldn't be." "It could just be a coincidence," Sam suggested, trying to keep his tone light. "But at the same time, it's still curious. Maybe we can find more clues around here." With that suggestion, the group returned to the treehouse, now with a new objective in mind. While Lucas investigated the dark corners and the rusty trunk, Alice and Sam began to examine the walls and floor, knocking on the boards in search of something hidden. It was Nina who, trying to move a loose floorboard, found something. "Guys, come and see this," she called, voice trembling. Beneath the boards was a secret compartment, carefully hidden. Inside, a small wooden box lay, covered with years of dust. With shaking hands, Lucas opened the box, revealing a collection of old objects: bracelet of colorful beads, a rusty pocket knife, and a hardcover notebook, the pages of which were yellowed with age. Alice picked up the notebook and began to leaf through it. "It's a diary," she said, almost whispering, "and it seems to have belonged to Thomas. In it, he talks about the treehouse, about his friends, and—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes wide. "What is it?" Sam asked anxiously. "He talks about a man. Someone he saw around the treehouse, a man who followed him." The air seemed to grow heavier around them. The warm, sunny summer suddenly seemed dark and oppressive. The treehouse, which had once been a fun project, had now become the epicenter of a dark mystery. Something very bad had happened there, and they were starting to get closer to the truth. The nights began to grow restless for the group. Each one, in their own homes, did not shake the thoughts of Thomas's diary. The descriptions he gave of the mysterious man were disturbing, especially since the boy seemed to grow more and more terrified as time passed. In the diary, Thomas mentioned having seen the man several times, always from a distance, watching him while he played with his friends. Little by little, the man began to approach, but he never said anything, just stared, with eyes that Thomas described as eyes of stone. He began to have nightmares, dreaming that the man dragged him deep into the forest from where he would never return. The next morning, the group gathered again in the treehouse, but the air of lightness had disappeared. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling that they were getting involved in something dangerous. Lucas, always the bravest, decided that they should follow the clues in the diary to try to understand who was the man that Thomas feared so much. "He mentions a cabin in the woods," Lucas said, pointing to one of the entries in the journal. "Thomas said he saw the man go in there a few times. Maybe he's still around." "Do you really want to go there?" Alice asked, her tone worried. What if he's still around?" "That's exactly why we need to go," Lucas replied. "If we find out who he was, maybe we can figure out what happened to Thomas." Reluctantly, the others agreed. Armed with flashlights and forced courage, the group began exploring the forest beyond the treehouse, following the directions outlined in the journal. The trail was barely visible, covered in leaves and branches, as if no one had been there in decades. After about an hour of walking, they finally spotted the cabin. It was a small, simple building made of dark, weathered wood, with a moss-covered roof. It looked abandoned, but at the same time there was something about it that conveyed a sense of impending danger. Lucas was the first to approach, pushing the door open cautiously. The interior was dark and smelled of mold. There was a small bed, a table, and a chair, all covered in dust. But what caught his attention the most was a wall covered in old photos, all in black and white. "This is strange," Sam commented, as he examined the photos. "They're pictures of children, lots of them. And look, here's Thomas." The photos showed Thomas and other children, all the same age, some smiling, others looking scared. And in all the photos, there was a figure in the background, kind of blurred, as if he were always there but never fully visible. It was the Shadow Man. "This is scary," Nina whispered, feeling fear rise inside her. "Who was this man? Why did he have so many pictures of children?" Alice, who was examining a drawer in the desk, found another newspaper clipping. It says here that other children disappeared before Thomas, and they had all been seen playing in the treehouse. Silence fell over the group as the truth began to unfold. The Shadow Man wasn't just a stranger. He was a predator, someone who was preying on children, and the treehouse was where he found them. Suddenly, the idea of restoring the treehouse seemed like a terrible mistake. They had awakened something dark, something that should have been forgotten. And now, they seemed to be heading down the same path that had led Thomas to his downfall. The days that followed the discovery of the cabin were filled with a heavy silence. The group continued to meet at the treehouse, but the initial excitement had been replaced by a palpable tension. No one wanted to admit it out loud. They all felt like they were being watched, as if the Shadow Man was still nearby, lurking in the trees. Nina especially was increasingly disturbed. She began to have vivid dreams in which she heard children's voices calling for help. Their words filled with fear and desperation. These voices seemed to be coming from the treehouse, as if they were trapped there, waiting to be freed. During the day, she tried to push these images away, but at night they returned, more intense than ever. One afternoon, as the group gathered in the treehouse, Nina finally decided to talk about her dreams. "I think there's something here," she said hesitantly. "Something we can't see, but it's trapped. I hear voices at night, as if the children who disappeared are trying to communicate." Sam, who had been skeptical until then, looked at her seriously. "Do you think they're ghosts?" "I don't know," Nina replied, feeling a lump form in her throat. "But I feel like these kids need our help, like they're stuck between this world and the next." Alice, who had always been the most sensitive to the supernatural, nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why we found the diary. Maybe Thomas is trying to tell us what happened." Lucas, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Whatever it is, we need to find out. If there's something or someone trapped here, we have to help free them." With that decision, the group began to search the treehouse for more clues. They examined every corner, knocked on every board, hoping to find something they had missed. And it was then, as he moved the old rocking chair, that Lucas noticed an inscription carved into the wood of the floor. It was a name, almost imperceptible, as if it had been carved by a trembling hand. Thomas. "Look at this!" exclaimed Lucas, pointing to the floor. "He left his name here. Maybe there are more." Encouraged by their discovery, they continued to examine the floor and walls. In another corner, they found more inscriptions, other names, some almost illegible, all written with the same care. These were the names of the other missing children, the ones who had played in the treehouse before Thomas. "They were all here," said Alice with a somber tone in her voice. "This place is like a prison for them." "We have to do something," said Nina with determination. "We can't leave them like this." But what could they do? The treehouse, which had once seemed like a refuge, was now a place of fear and sadness. They felt helpless, as if they were fighting against something much bigger than themselves. That night, Nina had the most intense dream of all. She was in the treehouse, but it wasn't the same house she knew. It was dark and cold, and the voices of children echoed around her, calling her name, begging to be freed. And then, in the darkest corner, she saw a figure, the Shadow Man, with the stone eyes watching her. She woke with a scream, her heart pounding. She knew time was running out. Something had to be done before it was too late. The atmosphere in Pines Village became stifling, as if the town itself was aware of the dark secret that were beginning to emerge. The group's meetings in the treehouse became more frequent, but now there was no more laughter or joking. The search for answers consumed everyone, and the house, once a refuge, now seemed like a meeting place with the unknown. Lucas, determined to unravel the mystery, suggested that they try one last effort to understand what was happening there. "We need to confront this once and for all," he said. "Let's spend the night in the treehouse. There's something here, we'll find out together." The proposal was met with silence, but no one objected. It was as if everyone knew, instinctively, that this was the final necessary step. The night chosen was a full moon, when the forest around the treehouse seemed most alive, with shadows dancing in the rhythm of the wind. They arrived at dusk, armed with flashlights, blankets, and forced courage. The treehouse, lit by the cold moonlight, seemed like a dark sentinel, waiting for them. As they entered, the feeling of being watched intensified, as if something or someone was there, waiting. The night began silently. They spoke in low voices, as if afraid of waking someone. But as the hours passed, the tension grew. Nina, who was sitting near the window, was the first to notice the changes. She felt a chill run through her body, and looking out into the forest, saw a shadow moving among the trees. "He's here," she whispered, voice trembling. "The Shadow Man." Everyone turned to the window, saw only darkness. Even so, the sense of imminent danger grew. The lanterns began to fail, flickering intermittently as if something were interfering. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the house. A low, prolonged creak, like old wood being forced. The group jumped to their feet, their hearts racing. The sound came from below, from the floor. And then they heard the voices. They weren't clear, but distant whispers echoing off the walls of the house. It was the children, their words filled with desperation. "We need to get out of here," Alice said, her face pale with fear. "This isn't safe." "We can't leave now," Lucas replied, trying to remain calm. "If we leave, we'll never know what really happened here." As they argued, the sound grew louder, and the house began to shake slightly, as if something were trying to break free. The figure of the shadow man appeared in the window, stony eyes fixed on the group. Lucas tried to confront him, but the figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "He's circling us," Sam said, looking around, trying to maintain his composure. "He's playing with us like a cat with a mouse." It was Nina who realized the solution. "He wants us to be afraid. He wants us to give up. But if we face this together, if we show that we are not afraid, maybe we can free the children." Gathering all the courage they had, the group joined hands and formed a circle in the middle of the house. Nina began to speak, calling out the names of the children who had disappeared, promising that they would free them. The shaking grew louder, and for a moment it seemed as if the treehouse would collapse. But then the voices began to quiet, the whispers turned to thanks, and the shadowy figure that had once been so threatening began to fade. The next moment, everything was silent. The house stopped shaking, and the darkness that had previously enveloped them began to dissipate. Flashlights came back on, and the shadowy figure had completely disappeared. Feeling exhausted but relieved, the group left the treehouse. The full moon lit the way back, and the forest, once threatening, seemed to have returned to normal. The children, the souls trapped by fear, had finally been freed. The days that followed were marked by a strange peace. The group of friends, still shaken by the events, tried to return to normality. But there was something different about all of them, a sense of premature maturity, as if they had aged years in just a few nights. The treehouse, although now cleansed of its dark secrets, still carried the weight of the stories it had once held. The group decided, by common consent, that they would no longer visit it. Not out of fear, but out of respect. They knew that it was a place of memories, of old pain, and that it would be best to leave it alone. Nina, who had been the most sensitive to everything that had happened, decided to write a letter to Thomas's parents. In the letter, she did not mention ghosts or shadowy figures. It said that, somehow, she believed that the spirits of Thomas and the other children had finally found peace. Thomas's parents moved, thanked her, and said that, for the first time in decades, they felt a sense of closure. Lucas, Alice, and Sam also moved on, but they would always keep in their hearts the lessons they learned that summer. They understood that fear is powerful, but friendship and courage are even more so. They learned that the past can haunt us. Present is where the difference is made. As for the treehouse, over time, it was forgotten again, its planks aging with the weather and the element. But those who knew its history would always look at it with respect and a touch of melancholy, knowing that among the tall trees of Pines Village, a piece of the past had been set free. And so, summer came to an end. The leaves began to change color, heralding the arrival of autumn, and life in Pines Village returned to its normal rhythm. But for Sam, Lucas, Alice, and Nina, that summer would never be forgotten. They had faced the unknown, they had touched the past, and somehow they had come out stronger. Treehouse would remain there, hidden among the trees, a silent guardian of ancient stories, waiting for the day when perhaps other brave young people would venture forth to discover its secrets. But until then, peace finally reigned in the woods of Pines Village, and the shadows had been dispelled.